How do you want it to work? What do you want
We're
from
just
me?
going to chat.
Right, okay.
And anything you don't want to talk about, you don't talk about. Or if you sit there and say, I don't want to go there, it's fine.
I don't think that's the issue for me. I suppose it's almost... I'm happy to be completely open, actually. I'm not going to tell my kids about it.
Right.
Not just now.
Okay.
I might. I don't know. I haven't dealt with that part yet.
That's interesting.
Depends what I say.
So you're telling me stuff that you haven't told your kids?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
I want you to meet my good friend, Joe. Now, we've known each other for a few years. We've spent a lot of time together, cycling, socialising, talking. But one thing we've never talked about until now is that for a long time, Joe was suicidal.
This expression my dad used to use, which was very apt. He said, with pressure, it's like the barrel of a gun leaning against your forehead. And he said, you can deal with that for a while, but after a while it becomes too much and you have to do something about it. I didn't know what else I could do about it. So for me, for several years probably, my get out was that if things became too bad, I would go off the Erskine Bridge. It was the way I got to sleep, because I would lie awake, nervous about the next day if a bank statement was due or I had bills to pay or whatever, just pressure. And the only way I could get to sleep was to think, well, it's okay, because if it gets too much for me, I'll go off the Erskine Bridge. That was my get out clause. That was how I would deal with the situation.
Speaking of Suicide Podcast is, by design, frank, open and honest. That doesn't always make it an easy listen, so if it's too much, just press pause. I'm Penny Latin, and this episode has been sponsored by Gary and the team at Williamson Food Service, based in the Highlands, so a big thanks to them for their support. And the reason we're all getting behind this series is the blunt fact that suicide rates are on the up, and we're convinced that the more we talk about this difficult and painful subject, the more we stand a chance of making a difference and saving lives. Speaking of Suicide is made in collaboration with and in support of Mikey's Line, so throughout the podcast we'll remind you of their helpline, and after we've heard from Joe, Shona from Mikey's Line will give us a few takeaway thoughts. I wanted to talk to you because we bumped into each other a few weeks back. I mentioned that we were making Speaking of Suicide, and you just went, oh yeah, in a very kind of relaxed manner, and then said, oh yeah, well that was my go-to for ages. And my jaw hit the floor, Joe, because I know we don't know each other that well, but we've spent time together and chatted and cycled and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't see that one coming, and it brought home to me immediately that actually none of us know each other very well, do we?
Yeah.
None of us know what's going on for someone else.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I owned a small family business, which my mum and dad had been. Well, they were there before me, so I bought it off them. It had been successful. It was tailing off slightly, much more competition. I took it on. In fact, I was the age then that my elder daughter is now, 28, and still thought I was indestructible. And it's okay, Dad couldn't do this in the modern world, but I could. Arrogance and stupidity. But I took it on. I was happy to take it on. It was a very successful little business in many respects.
He was a florist.
As a florist, yeah, I should say. So it was a retail flower shop, and it's, when you look at the stats for florists in the UK, it had a very high turnover. It was profitable in the face of it, but it just didn't. It was extremely long hours, very hard work, and even though it was a busy flower shop, it just didn't generate enough income. And when my dad had the shop in Shawlands in Glasgow, there was nobody for miles who was in the same business. And I think in my second year in, there was a big kind of UK-wide competition, and we won the regional florist of the year from the Flower Council of Holland for Scotland and the north of England. And they didn't quite believe that when I filled out the form, a number of other shops within, I think, a 3-mile radius, and there was something like 26. It was an enormous number. So although on the face of it, it was busy, bustling, it wasn't making the money it should have done, or what you people would have thought it had done, and the pressure became quite intense. In terms of the financial pressures and the VAT bill every quarter and whatever. We bought a house in a lovely part of the world.
Were you married?
I was married at the time, yeah. We had Hannah, my elder daughter, she was just born. We'd moved up to Glasgow. In fact, it was because I worked in the recruitment business, and I had very well, and I was thinking of opening my own recruitment company. And I think almost as a throwaway comment, my mum said to my wife, well, if he wants to run his own business, why doesn't he come and give his dad a hand? But the two, I wasn't there that time. And then we talked about it later, and I thought, well, actually, I can go and I can operate it as a business. I wasn't a florist. I wasn't particularly artistic at all. Thought I'll give it a shot, give my dad a hand. And unfortunately, my dad then wasn't particularly well. One of his main florists wasn't very well. So I had to start doing floristry, which had not been the plan at all. Quite the reverse. But I ended up becoming a florist. And I had the same name as my dad. So, oh, your dad's fantastic. Your dad's X, Y, and Z. And it was fantastic. I loved the time we then had as a father and son and mother and son as well. It was fantastic. That was a real upside. But the downside was that over time I could see the writing on the wall in terms of this was not working. But it was exceptionally difficult to unwind from. My family would have been completely supportive of any decision I took, but I felt the pressure.
Pressure because, not just because it was failing, but because it was a family business that you'd taken on.
Absolutely. I'd taken it on. I had next generation kind of idea, because my grandfather had started the business, my dad, then me, and I'm thinking, oh great, this is a nightmare. So the pressure was 6 and 7 days a week. So the pressure was financial. It then became familial, because my wife was never seeing me. My kids didn't see me. I worked at the weekends. It just seemed to be a downward spiral, and I didn't really know what to do with myself. So financially, as the pressure built, that way you kind of borrowed more money from the bank, did this, did X, Y, and Z, did anything you could to try and keep it going. But for me, I felt the pressure. This expression my dad used to use, which was very apt. He said, with pressure, it's like the barrel of a gun leaning against your forehead. And he said, you can deal with that for a while, but after a while it becomes too much and you have to do something about it. I didn't know what else I could do about it. So for me, for several years probably, my get out was that if things became too bad, I would go off the Erskine Bridge. And literally, it was the way I got to sleep, because I would lie awake, nervous about the next day, if a bank statement was due or I had bills to pay or whatever, just pressure. And the only way I could get to sleep was to think, well, it's okay, because if it gets too much for me, I'll go off the Erskine Bridge. I lived near the Erskine Bridge. So it was almost humorous in my own head, in a strange fashion, that was my get out clause. That was how I would deal with the situation. For
years?
Yeah, 2 or 3 years probably. I was, you'd stop at the side of the road and vomit out this car and stuff because
of the stress. Was tired,
and not because of just the stress. Yeah, so I was sleeping less and less, but more and more tired. If I did sleep, they weren't great sleeps. It was just a very stressful, and we were very happy in the face of it, but that was masking all kinds of pressures. We lived in a lovely village near Glasgow, Kilmacombe, and poverty isn't one of the issues in most of Kilmacombe. So the social pressure was enormous as well. As it was, I drove a van home. My ex-wife had the car. I drove a van, which was fine as a florist, and I was good at it. That was almost the saddest part. I was a very good florist. I had a business degree. I understood business, but I couldn't make the two work. Or rather, I stood back and thought, this isn't working, but I kept on going. And that was, with hindsight, the wrong thing to do. But at the time, you feel there's nothing else you can do. There's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to turn. I had borrowed money from different people, and that which in itself was difficult. Bank loans, etc. So it was just very stressful. And actually, for me, getting to sleep or driving along the road and thinking, well, I had two options. I could go off the Erskine Bridge or just turn the wheel into an oncoming lorry. That was a recurring one for me. Just because I thought it would almost be easier, but then I thought, that's terrible. The poor driver of the other vehicle, he's going to be killing me, and that's wrecking his life or her life. And I thought, that's awful as well. But again, you're not thinking in a particularly rational fashion. I tried to talk to my ex-wife about it, and to be fair to her, and absolutely fair to her, she responded with some very tough love, which at the time I was devastated by, but she was probably right. Insofar as I said, I tried to tell her about my get-out clause. I tried to tell her about...
So you tried to admit that you were thinking of suicide?
Thoughts of suicide. And she turned to me, looked at me, and just said, if you do it, I will not be at your funeral. You coward. Which was really hard at the time, but possibly with hindsight, she also wanted to talk about our two wonderful, fabulous... our daughters.
Just take a pause.
And how it would affect them. And she was right. She was absolutely right. Yeah.
So you didn't do it?
No. So I suppose I then looked for outs. We did other things. So in the end, the business became insolvent. I pulled the plug in the business, which was awful. We had at that point in time 2 shops. I declared the business bankrupt, which was an enormous stress for my family, myself, my wife. My kids didn't know. Unless they listen to this, they will never know, but they may well listen to this. Because I've never discussed it really much at all. It was a stain as far as I was concerned. We did my mother, God love her, who's just passed away. She and I were kind of in it together. My dad had died, so she ended up taking the business on with the creditor's full knowledge that she would continue with a kind of a pared back version of the business. We sold one of the shops and kind of cut our cloth, and I had promised my wife that when I turned 40, if the business still wasn't making money, then I would leave, which is what I did. I joined a recruitment company in Glasgow, and realised I joined the wrong one within about 2 days or less, and thought, oh God, I've made an arse of this. But at least I wasn't in the flower trade, and this is the thing for me. So I joined a company, I was unhappy at it, but the thoughts of suicide had gone because I had done the thing which I thought was unthinkable, which was declare the business bankrupt, and that was for me. It was awful.
What brought you though to that point? I mean, was there a point where you thought, actually, I am in genuine danger of seeing this through? Was there a turning point when you thought, I've got to make a change? Because clearly selling stepping away from the business was a massive change, and it was, you recognised what was at the heart of your huge stress and unhappiness. But was there a turning point when you recognised and said, actually, I've got to do something about this?
Well, actually, this is for me possibly the irony. So at the time, I hated her response. It could well have been my wife's response to me, and her forcing me to think about our kids, because I had thought about them. Of course, I had, but in that blinkered way, you think, well, actually, it'll be good for them because at least I'll be out of their hair, and they won't have me as a financial drain, and I won't be embarrassing, or they can have somebody else who's like other dads in Kilmacombe. They've got nice cars and incomes and stuff.
Were you embarrassed?
Oh, completely mortified. Oh yeah, absolutely. I was embarrassed.
Of what? Feeling
the social anxiety it causes. The people, the tittle tattle about you're a failure. It was a family business. My grandfather, my father. It had been the source of angst between myself and my wife. We had argued about it because I wasn't home enough. So then almost to not have been worth it all. That was crushing, and that still crushes me to this day.
Where was that pressure coming from, though? I mean, was it you putting that pressure on you? Did you have expectations, or did you grow up with it? Where?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I think the pressure was probably self-imposed. I grew up in a very happy family, although interestingly, when my dad and I were then in. Well, I bought the business, but he still was involved with it for a few years, and that was fabulous to have that time together. And I remember asking him. Now, he had huge financial pressures as well. He had 5 kids. He just moved house. He's got this business going, and I never told him my thoughts, but I asked him if he'd ever contemplated suicide. I looked at him and said, never, not a chance, never crossed my mind at all. And I was almost upset, which sounds ridiculous. I was almost thinking, oh God, I can't talk to my dad about it. I thought he might say, yes, I have thought about it, but this is what I did to get round it. And when he said, no, never, I went, oh.
You failed again.
Yeah, it's just me. Oh, Christ. And that was a devastating blow, if I'm honest.
Did you seriously think about it a lot?
Yes, if I'm honest. I was very stressed, and I was internalising almost everything. I obviously know that to be a massive mistake, but I internalised. So I would come home and my wife would say, how was today? And I would just say, fine. How was your day? And she was a teacher, very good teacher. In fact, she's now rector of the school she worked at. She's superb at her job. She didn't really want to know the details of the crap I was dealing with. And I wouldn't really have been very good at expressing them. I'd never sought medical help. I didn't go to a doctor's and say, this is where my head is at. Again, I didn't want to almost admit that I was probably clinically depressed at the time.
Why wouldn't you have wanted to admit it? Was that failure again? Failure again.
Yeah, I suppose because I had gone through school successfully, I had gone through university successfully, I had gone into accountancy, hated that to be fair, but then gone into recruitment and it had gone really well. Things had gone well. I had married young, I had married somebody I adored, and it was falling away. And then to say, well, actually that big decision I took for the family about buying my dad's business and settling in Glasgow and doing, making a success of it, it's all gone. And yes, we've got the nice house in Kilmacombe and everything looks okay. Everything wasn't okay, and that was awful.
We're going to pause for 2 seconds while you kind of have a breath, because it is a story that resolves and becomes happier, and yes. I want to come back to that. if listening to this is striking a chord with you, don't forget it is okay not to be okay. And if you need someone to talk to, you can text 07786 20 77 55. That's 07786 20 77 55, or contact them via Messenger, web chat or Twitter. Sunday to Thursday, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m, Friday to Saturday, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So, Joe, you bailed on the business,
Yes.
as you probably see it.
Yes.
Walked away, chucked in the towel.
Yes, I did.
How did you progress from there? How quickly did you manage to make life better? Because you lived with this for a long time.
It took a long time. I'd gone back into recruitment, and it had been a disaster, but I didn't want to tell my wife that. So she actually came into town on a Friday night. It was unusual, and we joined my colleagues for a drink. And it was a quick drink before we went for dinner ourselves. And we walked up the stairs of this bar, and she turned to me and just said, "You work with these people?" And oh God, thank God. "Can I leave now?" She said, "Yes, absolutely." So I resigned on a Wednesday. Now, it was near Mother's Day. This is actually all kind of relevant in my own head. I left on a Wednesday afternoon. I went to the shop in Kilmarnock on the Thursday morning early, about 6 in the morning. And I got home on Sunday evening about 6 in the evening. So it was like all day Thursday, all day Friday. And I just was at work for 3 days solid, because it became obvious that, thank God, I was going back in, which they weren't expecting, because without me it would have been impossible. It was a tough gig. That was an interesting day, a few days rather, but it was fine. But it was not. I didn't want to become a florist again. I promised my wife, and I meant it. I ended up joining a different recruitment company, and it went well. Like, hallelujah. Things were were better. I then got headhunted to go to another recruitment company. Fantastic. And then two things happened. One, I got cancer, and two, the stock market crash came, or the 2008 crash came, because that's the year I had my bowel cancer. So that was interesting. I struggled on at the same company for a while, but they were having financial difficulties because of the financial downturn. They were making lots of redundancies, and I had a heart attack. Just bad genes. Just some folk are just lucky.
I'm interested though. I mean, I'm not sounding shocked, because I know that you've had cancer and a heart attack. We know each other. That is something we have talked about and shared. We have shared health issues, cancer, in fact, and for me, I think it really changed how I felt about the value of life. Yeah. And I'm wondering whether it did the same for you.
Yes, I think it did. It's interesting. I look back at it now, with long enough ago, that I think for me, in terms of dealing with the stresses and the struggles that I had faced, the hardest thing was standing back the business and declaring it. And I felt that once I had done that, that was for me, that's what I wanted to avoid at all costs. That was the thing, that going off the Erskine Bridge or turning into an oncoming vehicle, that was the thing I dreaded, was the business going bankrupt. That having happened, actually the relief was enormous. My regret is I didn't, not so much do it earlier, but talk about it more openly and get better advice, A, for my own health, B, for the business. So basically, what I thought was that if the business went bankrupt, my life was over. That's how I viewed it. If the business went, my life was over. I wouldn't be able to face life if that had happened. And the revelation, I suppose, was that the sun still rose and the sun still set, and to a large extent nobody gave a bugger. and that was I can't actually express how important that was, because you can have thought, what the hell was I worrying about? So when cancer came along, I didn't think, oh good, this is a way of ending things. Quite the reverse, absolutely the reverse. It never crossed my mind that I was going to lose my life because of the cancer. Not for a minute.
Really?
Never. Heart attack was slightly more scary, I suppose. But at no time did I think cancer would get me. And at no time did I think, oh good, this is a way out. It was a revelation. And for me, the revelation was even stronger when I had a heart attack. I found it scary. I didn't want to lose my life. That was really important. And I suppose for me, that's 2009 when I started thinking, right, are you really happy with how life is? And it's something I tell my girls now, my kids, if you're happy, great. And if you're not, change something. Now, don't let life just wash over you. If take it with a scruff of the neck and do something about it. I wish I'd taken my own advice. I used to say to my girls, there's nothing, no matter what you do, I'm always going to love you. Come what may. And I wish almost I'd said that to myself. And I just, hang on. It took a very long time to like myself again.
Like yourself again? What? Because you'd
Failed.
You hadn't failed, but you thought you had. Do you still look back and think you failed?
Yeah, in some ways. I wish I'd been better at being honest with myself, being honest with others round about me. Honesty would have been the best policy. They always say, but it's true. If after 4 years in the business I thought, this is just not happening, you're still only 32 or 33 years of age, do something about it. It would have been fine. We'd have sold a bit, it would have been okay. I put blinkers on and just thought, no, this is busy, we're doing this. And I was a very good florist. I was a high profile florist in many respects. I used to go on stage and demonstrate and be arty and funny and clever and all the rest of it. So in the face of it, we're the top of your profession. And not to be. That was a tough gig.
Now life is very, very different.
My life is completely different.
Yeah.
I practiced what I wish I preached to myself 10, 12 years ago, however long it was, because at the age of, actually when I'd had my first heart attack, I was in recruitment, and I'd been asked to go self-employed by the company, which I did for a little while, but I got a phone call from a former flower supplier of mine, who then managed one of the big Dutch companies at the Glasgow branch, and he was looking for some help. So I went to give him a hand, and within a year or two he had actually moved on, and I was the general manager, and I did that in total for 7 years. But again, it was incredibly stressful. No matter what you did, it wasn't good enough. That's the feeling was. I thought, here we go again. And I didn't want, although it wasn't my business, I put enormous pressure on myself for it to be a success. And the beginning of 2015, we did a bad start to the year, but we had turned it around. And I think in the November of that year, 2015, I had emailed our managing director to say we had a bad start to the year, but we sold flowers and plants. We sold hundreds of different varieties of them, but we sold flowers and plants. And I said, good news is, bad start to the year, we've now got the highest turnover on flowers and plants ever. We've got the highest margin, gross and actual margin. So things had turned in massively. And I got a one-line response which said, yes, but your costs are higher. And it was just the archetypal straw that broke the camel's back. And I thought, no. I said, if I die of a heart attack in here, the only problem will be the inconvenience of me not being there to open up in the morning. So at the age of 51, I applied to 2 or 3 GP practices as their practice manager. Got an interview. It was the end of the first week, I think, of December 2015. I got offered the job a week or so later, and I started in Inverness on the 6th of January, I think it was, 2016. I'd been through Inverness on the way to Durness a couple of times. I had been to Inverness once, and I knew one guy in Inverness. And I took this leap of faith. One of my daughters was teasing about it just this week. She was saying, yeah, we sat down before Christmas. She said, oh, by the way, I've changed job, and by the way, I'm moving out of Kilmacolm, and by the way, I'm moving to Inverness. I'm like, where did that come from? And for me, it's interesting because when I think back to the failure I had felt, and there's enormous pressure and failure I'd felt when I was self-employed, I moved to Inverness. I couldn't sell my flat in Kilmacolm because there was rot in the flat above, so I had to floor-to-ceiling supports in the bay window. So I had to live in a room in someone's house for, it was actually a total of 15 months. And at 51 years of age, that wasn't quite how I'd planned things. But I loved the job, I loved the people I worked with, and for me that was enormously important. Respected them, they respected me, enormously important. I started January 2016, as we are here now in May 2021. I'm a partner of the practice. I have a decent car parked outside. I have a decent house. That, things which I genuinely thought I'd never get. And here's the thing: I thought I never deserved them.
Do you think you deserve them now?
I hope so. I think so. Yes, I work really hard, and it deals with it's stressful. It's hard work, but they are great people, and it's a lovely environment, and the work doesn't feel as difficult or as pressurised. Because although I was feeling the same pressure when I worked for the Dutch flower company, and I could see the pressure building, and I wanted to get myself away from that kind of pressure where you feel that nothing you do is right, nothing you do is good enough. And I'd felt that pressure before, and I wanted to get away from that. And I'd preached to my kids about, if you're not happy, say, change things. And I thought, hang on a minute, do it yourself.
How do you now keep tabs on where you're at, and how do you keep that difficult thoughts or stress at bay? Because you've learnt, you had years of living with it.
Yep.
You're
Yep.
Capable of feeling really rubbish.
Yep. It's I'll be honest with you. It's to say it took a very long time to be happy in my own skin. To think I deserved anything better. It took a very long time to just be at peace with myself. That was a really long time. But now, in terms of dealing with the stresses and pressures, the suicidal thoughts doesn't cross my mind, because for me, if you like, I had those demons. I look at my kids now. My ex-wife was right. I lost my marriage partially because of it. That was the casualty, but we're lucky. We still got on. We're still friends. We both have great relations with our daughters. And that's enormously important, and I can see I can see the impact it would have on my girls if anything happened to me. Having cancer, they were very upset, and I realised that if I had done anything to myself, they would have had a terrible time. And that's my wife was right. I suppose I would have been a completely selfish act because of my embarrassment, because of my thoughts of failure.
It would have been an act in response to the mental discomfort and pain and unhappiness you were in.
Yeah.
You thought you were going to do it in order to... It sounds crazy now, but you thought you were giving, that was the right thing to do because...
Yeah, take the pressure away from me, and they would have somebody better in their life who would provide for them better.
So that wasn't a selfish thought, Joe. It was a misguided thought. But it wasn't selfish. And here you are now, all these years later, and you didn't.
No,
and
thankfully.
I'm very glad you didn't.
Well, I look back and it seems slightly otherworldly, but I absolutely, I can still relate to the person I was then, in terms of I can understand the pressure I put on myself. At the time I thought there was no way out. I suppose with the benefit of looking back down the barrels of time, I realised that I never got a diagnosis, but I suspect I was clinically depressed, and medication would probably have helped me. I should have talked to somebody about it in terms of where my head really was. I kind of bounced it off a couple of people, but not seriously. That I didn't pursue, because again I thought ultimately that I would just I'd be fine. But I was going down further and further down. I know that now. I look back and realise how low I was and how wrong I was insofar as I thought that was my only option. And I am eternally grateful that I didn't do what crossed my mind so often. If I did what I had thought was the best thing to do, I would have been wrong. It wouldn't have been the best thing to do. It would have been the worst thing to do. Yes, it would have got me out of my pain, but it would have caused massive ripples of pain, which were, with hindsight, it's a wonderful thing, unnecessary. But at the time, you feel overwhelmed by it. And I'm very lucky that I didn't take the step.
Joe, thank you. And breathe.
Yeah. I haven't talked about some of what I've just talked about. Some of it really to many people. Well, many people full stop, and elements of it to most of my family don't know much about it. So it's I suppose hopefully it's cathartic for me, but it's more than that. If anything I've said can help anyone, and I mean one person, realise that what they think is the only option isn't the only option, and they seek help, which I should have sought, then I'll be a very happy man.
Just a reminder of Mikey's line: if you or someone you know needs help or advice, if anything Joe said has struck a chord with you, you can text 07786 20 77 55. That's 07786 20 77 55. Or you can contact them via Messenger, web chat or Twitter, Sunday to Thursday, 6pm to 10pm, Friday to Saturday, 7pm to 7am. Now here's Shona McPherson from Mikey's Line with a few thoughts for you to mull over.
Two things stand out for me from Joe's brilliant interview. The first is that our suicide risk can come from within us and our responses to difficult circumstances. And self-judgmental thoughts like I'm a failure, I'm not good enough, I'm going to let everyone down, are really hard to live with. And over time these can increase. So we all need to learn the skills of how to unhook from thoughts like these and how to live with the difficult feelings, and maybe even to begin to use difficult thoughts and feelings as as early warning signs that we need help. And the second thing that really stands out for me from Joe's interview is how for him the suicidal thoughts felt so real, so true, so factual to him, and like they were the only possible response to the difficult situation that he was in. And it's only then, with hindsight, he can see that his thoughts were warped or unhelpful due to him not having perspective, due to him being unwell. And it's so true for all of us when we're in low mood or when we have high anxiety. Our thoughts can seem true, but things may very well be out of perspective. And if you feel like this or are struggling with difficult thoughts or feelings, the best time to get help is now. Mikey's line is here for you every evening. Somebody is at the end of the text line. The text line number is 077 86 20 7755.
Well, a huge thanks to Shona and all the team at Mikey's Line for the work they do. This episode was sponsored by Williamson Food Service, and the podcast platform is supported by D&D Paving Limited. Please do like, share and comment about the podcast. And if you want to get involved by sponsoring an episode or telling your story, get in touch with Mikey's Line. Speaking of Suicide is an adventurous audio production. The music is Nana by Tom Ireland.